everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to be looking at the ongoing French presidential campaign and try to see what its possible outcomes could look like. So first, let's take a look at the French electoral system and political landscape. So in France, the president is the one who yields executive power, while other countries where unlike other countries, where the president holds a merely ceremonial position. He's a symbol more than someone who yields real power except in certain exceptional circumstances. Therefore, the French president is elected by universal suffrage every 5 years. This is the most important election in the country, even more than the legislative elections, as the executive possesses more power than the legislative in France. So what does the French political landscape look like at the moment? Well, to answer this question, we must look back at what happened 5 years ago. The 2017 presidential election changed the French political landscape quite drastically. Since approximately the 80s, the Socialist Party and the main right-wing party, now called the Republicans, had dominated the landscape, having in turn the majority in parliament or detaining the executive power. In 2017, for the first time, neither party was in the second round of the presidential election. The socialist candidate even gaining less than 10% of the vote, which was all the more disruptive considering the ongoing president was from the Socialist Party. Considering the outgoing president was from the Socialist Party. So a centrist candidate, Emmanuel Macron, faced his far-right adversary Marine Le Pen and beat her in April 2017. So it was a unique election because Marine Le Pen was obviously from the Rassemblement National, and it had only been once at the second round of the elections. It was in 2002. And Emmanuel Macron obviously was also a newcomer. He had created his party like a few months before the election, so it was really an election unlike any seen before. So it seems that the old opposition between the right and the left, which was mostly based on economic differences, has actually shifted since 2017. It looks like identity, globalization, and immigration are now the main political issues in France. On the one hand, Emmanuel Macron embodies the centre-right. He promised to make France a start-up nation, synonymous with building a modern, open country fully integrated in globalisation. In other words, the current president embodies the quote-unquote open society. And on the other hand, Marine Le Pen embodies the far-right and promises to defend French sovereignty by opposing the EU on controversial topics such as immigration, economics, and promises to defend a more traditional national identity. This opposition between, let's say, pro and anti-globalist, even though it's not the only opposition, but it's one of the most important ones, seems to be the main political divide in France now and weighs heavily in the ongoing campaign. However, this is a rather broad overview because things are a little more complex at the moment, especially on the right. So it's not only Marine Le Pen versus Macron. Obviously, this is a big issue, but there's more, let's say. So because on the left, all of the candidates are below 10% or just above, depending on the polls. There are, broadly speaking, three main candidates on the left. The current socialist mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, currently between 5 and 2% in the polls. The candidate for the Green Party, Yannick Jadot, currently between 8 and 5% in the polls. And finally, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of the far-left party, La France Insoumise, currently between 8 and 13%, again, depending on the polls. So there are very few chances for the left to reach the second round of the elections in April 2022. This is mainly due to it's an inability to unite behind a common candidate and defend ideas that attract a sufficient amount of voters. They seem quite disconnected from certain realities, especially the mayor of Paris. And so on the right, leaving Macron out, we are left with three main candidates: Marine Le Pen, Eric Zemmour, and Valérie Pécresse. Le Pen is the leader of the far-right party, Le Rassemblement National, and is currently between 13 and 17% at the polls. Valérie Pécresse is the newly elected candidate for the Republican Party and has recently been getting ahead of Marine Le Pen, gaining between 16 and 19% of voting intention in the polls. And finally, Eric Zemmour, a former journalist and right-wing polemicist, has been gaining between 12 and 15% of the vote, again depending on the polls. So the match, Macron versus Le Pen, might not be inevitable after all, even though it is still possible. Macron is in all of the polls at 20% or more. So the question is, who out of Le Pen, Zemmour and Pécresse will he be facing in the second round in April 2022? Will Valérie Pécresse manage to maintain her favourable position in the polls, or will Le Pen beat her and face Macron again? Will Eric Zemmour go up in the polls again? Well, Pécresse will probably go down in the polls in the upcoming months unless something very unexpected occurs. I've just seen some polls that have just come out and she's going down and Marine Le Pen's going back up again, because it changes a lot all the time. So I think that there might be a sort of more definitive slide, so to say. A few months ago, Eric Zemmour was very high in the polls and it even looked like he might reach the second round. But even before Pécresse was nominated by her party in 2021, he had gone down from 17% in the polls to about 13%, and Marine Le Pen has started going up again. So right now, Pécresse is high in the polls, although she may be going down and benefiting from quite a lot of attention since her nomination. However, it will be difficult for her to maintain this position in the long run. That's what it does. It has happened previously in other elections as well. So the match is currently taking place between four candidates: the current president and the three main right-wing candidates. The campaign is going to speed up during the months of January, and the polls will probably shift as well, which will be all the more interesting. I hope that this short explanation of the French presidential campaign was interesting and somewhat helpful to you. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you all very soon.